Peah Perek Aleph, Mishnah Vav. So in order to understand our Mishnah, we need to see a few things about this short introduction about the requirement to give Peah. So until now we've learned that a person is required to give Peah from his field. Okay, we saw before. It says Ubekutzuchem et kitzir artechem lo techale pe'at tzadcha liktzor. You're not allowed to entirely harvest your field. Rather, you have to leave a corner of your field, and that's what we call Peah. Lo techale pe'at tzadcha. You have to leave a corner of your field. What happens if a person didn't leave the corner of his field? So then the halacha is that a person, even if he didn't leave a corner of his field, nonetheless, he's required to still take off Peah. Okay? So the halacha is as well. Let's go back to the psukim for a second. Okay, there's a halacha of Terumot and Ma'asrot. So the halacha is that you have to take off of your produce, Terumot and Ma'asrot, from all of your produce, except Peah is not chayav in Terumot and Ma'asrot. Why? Because it says, the Torah says in Dvarim, Perek Yudaled Miktzei Shalosh Shanim Totzi et Kol Ma'asar Tfuatcha B'Shana Hahi U'Vinachta B'Sharecha. You have to take every 3 years. You have to remove all the produce that you meant to give it to the Kohen or the Levi and you didn't actually give yet. Uva HaLevi Ki Ein Lo Chelek V'Nachala Imach. And the Levi who has no portion with you, etc., etc., V'Achlu V'Saveh, and they can come and take part in your produce. Okay? But in Peah, Yesh lo chelek v'nachala imach. Why? Because if the Levi is poor, he can take Peah. So from this we derive that Peah is not chayav in Terumot and Ma'asrot. What happens though? If a person, this is true, so as long as you leave the Peah in the field, then you don't have to take off Terumot and Ma'asrot. But that's not indefinite. If a person, for example, cut his entire field and forgot to take off Terumot and Ma'asrot, and forgot to take off Peah, he is still required to leave the 60th of Peah from his produce. Up to a certain point, we're going to see, up to a certain point, we'll see it's still patur in Terumot and Ma'asrot. Past that point, and once it's chayav in Terumot and Ma'asrot, you still have to take off Peah, but it's still obligated in Terumot and Ma'asrot first. Says the Mishnah, Le'olam hu noten mishum Peah, a person must always give Peah, Upatur min ha-ma'asrot, and he's exempt from ma'aser, ad she-yimareach. Until the word yimareach means from miruach, to shmir. So in order to understand this, we have to go back to and understand what is the process of harvesting produce, or wheat, or what have you. So let's say you have wheat in your field. So the first thing you'll do is ksira, you're going to cut it. And then you're going to do disha, threshing, i.e. you're going to have to separate the wheat kernels from the stalks. Then you're going to do winnowing, zriya. What that's going to leave you with is your wheat kernels. Okay? That you're going to gather and put it in the kri. The kri is your storehouse and your warehouse. Finally, the last thing that the farmer would do is, for whatever reason, I'm not entirely sure, but he would do what's called miruach hakri. Miruach hakri is, he's smearing down, miruach hakri, smearing down the whole storehouse. Okay? And that's the last thing that he does, and once it's there, then it's considered ready or in the storehouse, and it's considered his. So says the Mishnah that we saw. Says the Mishnah, a person, it's not considered produce in his storehouse until Yimareach. So therefore, Le'olam, I'll go back to the Mishnah, Le'olam hu noten mishum Peah, a person always has to give Peah. Even if he forgot to leave in the field, he has to take off a 60th, but it's patur min ha-ma'asrot ad she-yimareach. Until he does miruach hakri, he can take off that 60th of Peah, and he does not have to also first take off Terumot and Ma'asrot, and then take the 60th of Peah. But once he does miruach hakri, and then he remembers, I forgot to do Peah, nonetheless, first he has to take Terumot and Ma'asrot. The produce is obligated in Terumot and Ma'asrot, and then he can take off the 60th for the Peah. Does he have to take into account the Terumot and Ma'asrot to give Peah on the total amount? That's a machloket. The Mishnah continues, talks about a number of different things that are relevant to miruach hakri, as we saw before. Miruach hakri is a very important term in halachic terminology. Miruach hakri, the smearing of the storehouse. So when you do miruach hakri, that is the sign, the point at which it becomes yours, and it's chayav Terumot and Ma'asrot. Similarly, v'notein mishum hefker upatur min ha-ma'asrot ad she-yimareach. If I give my produce, if I say my produce is hefker, I'm not chayav Terumot and Ma'asrot. I'm only chayav Terumot and Ma'asrot that belong to me. Okay. Meaning, remember we said the Baal Levi, the Levi has Che'en lo chelek v'nachala imach. If I make it hefker, then Levi can have chelek v'nachala imach. So if I make it hefker before I do miruach hakri, then I don't have to take off ma'asrot, but it's also trumot. But if I do miruach hakri, ad sheyimarech. But once I do miruach hakri, first I have to take off trumot to ma'asrot, and then I can make it hefker. Or if I made it hefker, first I have to take off trumot to ma'asrot. Similarly, umachil la behema la chaya v'la ofot. What if I want to use the produce that I collected as animal feed? Says the Mishnah, I can give it to my animals, and even b'torat keva, I can feed them normal feed. A person can only eat from his, before miruach hakri, I can only eat achilat arai. But I can feed my animals, my behema, chaya and ofot, upatur mina ma'asrot, again I'm exempt from ma'asrot, ad sheyamarech, until I do miruach hakri. V'notel min hagoren v'zorea. What if I want to use the produce, the corn kernels or the wheat kernels to plant the next year's crop? Upatur mina ma'asrot ad sheyamarech. Divrei Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says, I can take from the goren, I can take from my storehouse and use it to plant the next year, and I'm exempt from ma'asrot until I do miruach hakri. Once I do miruach hakri, of course, again, I still have to first take off trumot to ma'asrot, and then only then can I use it for my plant of the next year. Divrei Rabbi Akiva. That's Rabbi Akiva's opinion about miruach hakri. Chachamim argue, and the Chachamim say no. The Kati says, right? The Chachamim say that midrabanan, I'm not allowed to plant until I take off trumot and ma'asrot. The Kati notes that halacha is like the Chachamim. New halacha, again related to miruach hakri. Kohen v'levi shelachu et hagoren. Let's say I harvested my field, I brought everything in, but I didn't do miruach hakri, and now I want to sell. Okay, so I sell it to a kohen or a levi before I did miruach hakri, because remember, miruach hakri is the line, the demarcation line, at which a person is obligated to take off trumot and ma'asrot. Then the Mishnah says, ha-ma'asrot shalahem ad sheyimarech. If I sold it to them before I did miruach hakri, they can keep the ma'asrot or the truma, basically if he's a kohen or a levi, for themselves. But if I sold it to them after miruach hakri, even though you're obligated, the produce has to go to a kohen, so he says, I'll keep it for myself. The Mishnah says, no way. The Chachamim said, we don't want you to jump on and buy produce that you can keep the trumot and ma'asrot for yourself. So therefore, once it's miruach hakri, they have to give it to a different kohen or a levi. Final halacha that relates to miruach hakri, hamakdish. If I say, okay, I want my produce, I collected it and now it's in the stores, and I want to give it to Hegdish. So I dedicate it to Hegdish. So what's going to happen is the Beis Hamikdash, I'm going to send them an email, and they're going to send a gizbar. They're going to send a pakid. They're going to send what's the word for gizbar? You're thinking of it right now. I don't remember. They're going to send a representative, and he's going to go and evaluate it and sell it back to somebody so I could buy it back myself, as long as I pay market price plus a fifth. So I makdish it, I want to give to the Beit HaMikdash, I want to give back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I give it to God, upodeh, and then I redeem it. Chayav b'ma'asrot, ad shimareach ha'gizbar. Okay? It's chayav in ma'asrot until the gizbar does miruach hakri, unless the gizbar himself did miruach hakri. And what this means is as follows. If I gave it to the gizbar before he did miruach, I didn't do miruach hakri, I gave it to him, and now I bought it back from him, and he didn't do miruach, then the chiyuv of trumot and ma'asrot happened on my watch, when it was in my possession. I did the shmiring, so therefore I have to give trumot and ma'asrot. But ad she'mareach ha'gizbar, if the gizbar himself did miruach hakri, then when I redeemed it, bought it back, the gizbar Hegdish doesn't have to give trumot and ma'asrot. So therefore, when I bought it back from the gizbar, when I redeemed it, it was not chayav in trumot and ma'asrot, and then it's not chayav in trumot and ma'asrot. It's also. We'll read it again. L'magdishu podeh. If I give Hegdish and then redeem it, chayav in ma'asrot. It's always chayav in ma'asrot ad she'mareach ha'gizbar, unless the gizbar himself did the miruach hakri. And then, since at the time that the gizbar did miruach, it's not chayav in trumot and ma'asrot, I'm not chayav in trumot and ma'asrot either. I want to dedicate this learning to the memory of my father, Harav Simcha ben Yitzchak Kalman. And if you have any comments or questions, feel free to contact me, rspolter@gmail.com. Have a great day.